March 19, 1943, 200 feet above the North Atlantic, west of Ireland. The wind batters the fuselage of a Royal Air Force B-24 Liberator as it claws through darkness so complete it feels physical, like a hand pressed over the cockpit glass. Inside, the air smells of oil, sweat, and cold metal. Flight Lieutenant John Godfrey grips the control yoke, eyes locked on the black void ahead. Below him, somewhere in the rolling, invisible ocean, German U-boats are killing the Atlantic. You can't see them, that's the problem. For 4 years, the Battle of the Atlantic has been fought largely blind. German submarines surface at night, running on diesel engines, faster and farther than Allied escorts. On the surface, a U-boat is nearly invisible. Black hull, low profile. No wake worth mentioning. Against moonless skies, even a trained eye struggles to pick one out. Tonight, intelligence says one is out there. In the rear of the aircraft, Sergeant Alan Price leans toward a green glowing radar screen. The ASV radar set hums softly, a steady mechanical whisper beneath the roar of engines. A faint blip appears, then fades. "Contact," Price says. His voice is cautious. Radar contacts have lied before. Godfrey eases the aircraft lower. The altimeter needle drifts downward. Salt spray flashes faintly against the underside of the wings. Still, nothing is visible. The radar shows something, metal moving, but by the time the Liberator reaches visual range, the contact disappears. Below, the U-boat commander has already seen them. Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Schulte stands on the conning tower of U-boat U-456, binoculars raised. He spots the silhouette first, a dark cross sliding across the stars. Aircraft not British. Too late to dive fully, but early enough to vanish. "Alarm!" Schulte shouts. The U-boat plunges, water floods the deck. In seconds it's gone. Above, the Liberator passes over empty sea. This scene has repeated itself hundreds of times. Radar finds them too early. Eyes find them too late. By early 1943, the Allies are losing ships faster than they can replace them. Tankers dock grain carriers, troop transports, over 600,000 tons sunk in a single month. Winston Churchill later admits it was the only thing that truly frightened him during the war. And somewhere far from the freezing Atlantic, in a small British workshop, one man believes he knows why and how to fix it. His name is Humphrey de Verde Lee. Lee is not a naval officer. He is not even a radar specialist in the traditional sense. He is an engineer, stubborn, precise, and deeply irritated by inefficiency. He has been studying reports from coastal command crews for months. Every patrol reads the same. Radar contact gained. Aircraft approaches. U-boat dives before visual confirmation. Contact lost. Lee sees the pattern others dismiss. Radar works, but it gives away the attack. German U-boat commanders have learned something crucial. If radar sees them, an aircraft is nearby. And aircraft attacks always come from above and behind. The moment their detectors scream, they dive. Darkness protects them. Lee believes the solution isn't better radar. It's light, not just any light. A sudden, blinding, downward-facing beam mounted beneath the aircraft, invisible until the last seconds of the attack. Radar would guide the plane silently through the dark. The light would only switch on when it was already too late. The idea sounds simple, almost laughably so. That's exactly why it's ignored. Lee takes his proposal to the Air Ministry. Committees listen, papers shuffle. Officers nod politely, some openly scoff. A giant searchlight on an aircraft. At night over the ocean. Ridiculous, too heavy, too obvious, too vulnerable. Radar is the future, they say. Lights are obsolete. Meanwhile, ships keep sinking. Lee refuses to let it go. Using private funds and borrowed equipment, he builds a prototype in secrecy. A powerful carbon arc lamp fitted into a streamlined housing. He tests it in fields, then on airstrips, timing how fast it can ignite. The beam is brutal, white, concentrated, instant. He knows exactly what it will do to a surfaced U-boat crew accustomed to darkness. By late 1942, after relentless pressure and quiet support from coastal command pilots who are tired of watching submarines escape, Lee gets his chance. One aircraft, one modified Liberator, one unorthodox experiment. They install the device beneath the fuselage. Official paperwork barely acknowledges its existence. The crews nickname it quietly the Lee Light. On its first operational night patrol, Flight Lieutenant Godfrey sits once again over the Atlantic. Same darkness, same cold, same green radar screen. Then Price speaks again, sharper this time. Contact. Dead ahead 6 miles. Godfrey nods. He throttles back, descends, and keeps the aircraft invisible against the night sky. No navigation lights, no moon. Just radar and faith. At 1 mile he reaches down. His thumb hovers over the switch. Below, Captain Lieutenant Schulte stands on the deck of U-456, calm, confident, certain that darkness still belongs to him. Then the ocean explodes in light. The switch clicks. A column of white light slams downward from the Liberator's belly, punching through darkness like a physical blow. For a fraction of a second, the Atlantic looks frozen. Waves etched in silver, foam glowing like frost. And there, dead center in the beam, is U-456. On the conning tower, Schulte's world detonates. Men scream, hands fly to eyes already burning. The sudden transition from total darkness to artificial daylight is paralyzing. The crew had seconds before, now they have none. "Alarm! Crash dive!" Schulte shouts, but the words collide with panic. Above them, the Liberator is already diving. Godfrey pushes the nose down. The aircraft screams forward, engines howling. In the bomb bay, depth charges are armed. The beam stays locked, a merciless spotlight pinning the submarine in place. For the first time in the Atlantic War, a U-boat cannot hide. The navigator counts under his breath. 2, 1, the depth charges fall. They strike the water just ahead of the diving submarine, vanishing beneath the surface before detonating. The ocean erupts. A concussive wall slams into the hull of U-456, buckling plates, snapping valves, hurling men against steel. Inside the submarine, lights shatter, gauges spin wildly. Water sprays from ruptured seals. Blow ballast! Schulte orders, but the boat is already falling. Another explosion rips through the sea. Then silence. Heavy, crushing silence. Above, the Liberator circles once. Oil spreads across the surface. Debris floats up slowly, almost gently. The crew doesn't cheer, they stare. For years, this moment has slipped away from them at the last second. For years, the night had protected the hunter beneath the waves. Tonight, the night betrayed him. Back in Britain, reports come in before dawn. One U-boat destroyed. Clear visual confirmation. The engagement description is different. No last-second dive, no lost contact. One phrase appears repeatedly, target illuminated at close range. At first, the Admiralty treats it cautiously. One kill proves nothing. Luck, perhaps. A coincidence. Then another patrol returns, and another. Within weeks, Coastal Command aircraft fitted with the new light begin reporting a pattern. Radar contact, silent approach. Sudden illumination. Attack, kill! German losses spike, U-boat captains begin filing frantic reports. Something has changed. Aircraft are no longer overshooting, no longer searching blindly. They are appearing out of nowhere, impossibly close. The Kriegsmarine responds quickly. New orders are issued. Dive immediately upon radar warning, regardless of confirmation. But the warning comes too late. The radar detectors trigger only when the aircraft is already overhead. The light is not just illumination, it is deception weaponized. By early 1943, the Lee Light spreads across Allied patrol squadrons. British Liberators, Wellingtons, and later American aircraft received modified versions. The United States Navy, initially skeptical, begins fitting lights to long-range patrol planes operating from Newfoundland and the Caribbean. American engineers refine the system. Faster ignition, better shielding, integration with improved radar sets like ASV Mark III. The ocean grows smaller for U-boats. In the mess halls of German submarine bases in Lorient and Kiel, conversations change tone. Confidence erodes. Veteran captains who once hunted freely now speak of the eye in the dark. Some claim the British can see through the sea itself. Morale fractures. For the Allies, the shift is immediate and measurable. Shipping losses drop, convoys survive crossings that would have been massacres months earlier. Escort commanders begin to believe for the first time that the Atlantic can be won. But victory brings escalation. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz orders countermeasures. New radar-absorbing coatings, experimental snorkels to reduce surface time. Anti-aircraft guns mounted on conning towers, transforming submarines into flak traps. Some crews fight back. On several occasions, illuminated U-boats rake attacking aircraft with gunfire. Allied losses rise briefly, but it doesn't matter. The balance has already tipped, because the light is only part of the trap. It works because it arrives at the end of a chain. Radar detection, silent approach, disciplined crews, and now, perfect timing. The U-boat commander is no longer reacting to sound or sight. He is reacting to inevitability. Humphrey de Ver-de-Lis watches the results with grim satisfaction. He does not celebrate, he simply refines, adjusts beam angles, works on power efficiency, solves problems others overlooked because they thought the idea was too simple to matter. By May 1943, the numbers tell the story. 41 U-boats destroyed in a single month. The Battle of the Atlantic, once teetering on the edge of disaster, has turned. But the men flying those night patrols know something deeper. They've seen the moment when darkness stopped being protection. They've watched seasoned hunters freeze like prey under a sudden white sun. And they understand that this war, so often decided by massive fleets and grand strategies, has just pivoted on the flip of a single switch. June 1943, RAF St. Evil, Cornwall. The airfield is alive long before sunset. Ground crews move with rehearsed urgency, rolling bomb trolleys, checking fuel lines, running hands along rivets still warm from the afternoon sun. On the dispersal pads, liberators crouch like predators, bellies heavy with depth charges and something new, sleek housings tucked beneath the fuselage, painted matte black. The Lee light is no longer an experiment. Flight Lieutenant Godfrey walks beneath his aircraft, helmet under one arm, glancing instinctively at the lamp's casing. It looks unremarkable. That still bothers him. Something this small shouldn't be changing the course of a war. And yet, every patrol proves it does. In the briefing hut, a Coastal Command intelligence officer points to a wall map. Red grease pencil marks cluster thickly across the Atlantic approaches. Dönitz has shifted the wolf packs, the officer says. They're trying to avoid our patrol zones. Doesn't matter, we'll find them. Godfrey exchanges a glance with his radar operator. They both know what find them means now. Night falls, engines roar. The liberators lift into darkness. Out over the Bay of Biscay, U-boat commanders feel the pressure tightening. Orders from Berlin are increasingly desperate. Sink more ships, take more risks. Accept losses. Captain Lieutenant Franz Keller of U-boat U-514 reads the latest directive in silence. He is 31 years old. He has sunk 7 ships. He has watched friends vanish into the Atlantic without warning. He knows the rumors, aircraft that appear without sound. Blinding lights, no time to dive. Still, the convoy lanes must be attacked. Just after midnight, Keller surfaces to recharge batteries. The sea is calm, stars are sharp. His crew works quickly, scanning the horizon. Then the detector screams, radar contact. Someone shouts. Keller's stomach tightens. Where? Before anyone can answer, the night turns white. The beam slams down, locking U-514 in place. Keller's eyes flood with pain. He stumbles, half blind, shouting commands he cannot hear over the roar of engines descending from above. The aircraft is already there. Depth charges detonate with surgical precision. The U-boat shudders, then breaks. Water surges through ruptured compartments. Keller never reaches the hatch. From the air, the attack lasts less than 20 seconds. Back at St. Naval, the kill is logged without ceremony. By summer's end, U-boat losses become unsustainable. Dönitz is forced to withdraw many submarines from the North Atlantic. For the first time since 1939, convoys cross with relative safety. But the significance of the Lee light goes beyond numbers. It changes behavior. U-boats stay submerged longer, limiting speed and range. Crews grow exhausted, maintenance suffers. Attacks become hesitant. The initiative is gone. Allied aircrews feel it too. There is a new confidence in the cockpit. Radar contacts are no longer frustrations. They are promises. Crews rehearse the final approach in their heads. Altitude, speed, angle, switch. The light fires, the submarine dies. In the United States, Navy planners take notice. Long-range patrol squadrons adopt the system across the Atlantic and Caribbean. American engineers improve the housing, reduce drag, integrate it with emerging microwave radar. The technology evolves, but the concept remains Lee's. He receives little public recognition. Wartime secrecy buries his name. Official reports credit combined radar and illumination techniques. Lee does not protest. He understands that the victory is collective. But privately, among aircrews, the truth is known. The war at sea has turned because someone refused to accept that darkness was unbeatable. In late 1943, Winston Churchill reviews updated shipping figures. Losses are down dramatically. Shipyards outpace sinkings. Supplies flow freely to Britain and the Soviet Union. Plans for a cross-channel invasion move from speculation to scheduling. The Atlantic is open, and in that opening lies the future fall of Nazi Germany. Years later, veterans struggled to explain what it felt like. To fly hours through nothingness, to trust an invisible screen, to flick a switch and suddenly see the enemy laid bare beneath them. Some describe it as unfair, others call it justice. But all agree on one thing. The moment the Lee light ignited over the Atlantic, the ocean stopped being a hiding place. It became a battlefield the Allies could finally see.